Welcome, friends, to episode 2 of the Club podcast from C Club. Today, I'm so excited to be joined by Li Jin, founder of Atelier Ventures, former A16Z investor / passion economy definer. Li has been a wonderful conversation partner and friend for me over the last few months within C Club, and I'm very excited to bring a conversation to you here today. We talk about the creator economy and her optimism for crypto being a tool to help the creator economy evolve, the meaning of ownership, how to distribute ownership and create incentive alignment. I think we go to a few places in that conversation topic that Li wasn't quite expecting to go to, so I'm excited to hear how you feel about that. And of course, if you've seen Li on the internet recently, you might have seen her take on investing, and maybe even called it more of an activist take on investing. Found this conversation fascinating, as I do with all my conversations with Li, and I'm very excited to bring it here to you today. So let's jump in. Welcome, Li. So stoked to have you as one of our first episodes of the C Club podcast.
It's wonderful to be here. Thank you so much for having me.
I would love for you to take a minute and just introduce yourself. And I'm thinking like the number of things that you've been doing in the space recently leads me to think through how I would actually introduce you. So I'm just going to turn it over to you.
Sure. So my full-time day job is as an angel investor and as a fund manager. I invest out of my fund called Atelier Ventures, which I started last summer. I've been in venture for the last 5 years. Previous to this, I was at Andreessen Horowitz working on the consumer investing team. And then, now I'm focused on investing in the future of online work, and that encompasses the creator economy, new platforms that people are using to make income online, anything that doesn't really intersect with traditional 9-to-5 jobs is my interest. I am trying to emancipate people from 9-to-5 jobs. So those are my investing interests. And then I am also a creator on the side. So I've been an artist for my whole life, primarily oil painting now. I have a podcast called Means of Creation, where we interview founders who are building in the future of workspace. Recently, we just hosted the CTO of this workers co-op version of Uber and Lyft called the Drivers Cooperative. It's basically like Uber or Lyft if they were owned entirely by their drivers. And then I also have a newsletter. I have 2 newsletters. One is called Means of Creation. Another one is my personal newsletter, Li's newsletter, li.substack.com. And then I also built and maintain sidehustlestack.co, which is this resource for side hustle work on the internet. And I think that's about it. There's probably something that I'm forgetting, but that gives you a good overview.
I was having a conversation the other day with another guest, and literally like that introduction, and even at the end, I'll be like, "Hey, where should people find you on the internet?" It's just getting longer and longer and longer and longer and longer and longer. And I think it sort of speaks to like this world that you're so passionate about and have spent so much time talking about, and I think adding language to over the last little while, which is one, it doesn't look like 9-to-5s, and it more looks like participating in a number of different self-started businesses, income opportunities, increasingly DAOs and communities. And I think we're going to maybe need to start to change our formats for podcasts sooner or later, or maybe keep it to the greatest hits. But I love that.
Yeah, it's getting harder and harder to like write a resume or to fill in your LinkedIn now, right? Because people don't just do one thing anymore.
A resume and a LinkedIn. It seems so foreign to me right now, which is something I want to get into in a bit. But I want to zoom back because I think I first came in contact with your work when you were at A16Z, and read a post that I think sort of kind of went crazy, and I think was a fairly impactful moment in your life, the post of where you outlined the passion economy. And I wonder if you can sort of take us back to that moment in time, and what was the insight that captivated you then, and I'd love to sort of think about how that's changed over the last few years or months.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, feels like a long time ago now, even though it was not even 2 years ago. Fall 2019, I published a post called The Passion Economy and the Future of Work, and it kind of breaks the internet, if you will. Basically, I describe how new online platforms were arising that helped people build their own businesses online, do a variety of different types of work, and earn income more flexibly and more autonomously. And that type of work had previously sort of been contained to the gig economy, which offered a lot of freedom and autonomy, but it didn't really let people be their own boss because they were kind of reporting to this algorithmic manager who told them exactly what to do at every given moment that they were logged on. And in contrast, the passion economy gave people the tools to really be their own boss and to have the ability to offer lots of non-commoditized services and products to a global audience and thereby hopefully make a living. Yeah, so that was 2 years ago. And it's been really interesting to see that thesis unfold from there. There's been definitely a lot of learnings since then. I think a piece that I recently published just, I think, last week, which is like, I think, a good update to that piece. It's called "The Creator Economy is in Peril. Here's how we fix it," or "Now it's time to fix it," something like that. But it basically is like an update to and a response to that original post. And it talks about how actually we're not fully living up to this promise of the passion economy because users and creators are so locked into a handful of very centralized platforms from which they can't port away any data or have real ownership over their relationships with their customers or their fans or their audiences. So they are essentially still at the mercy of these algorithmic managers, similar to the gig economy, where their work is being commoditized. They're unable to leave. They are still being gatekept in terms of access to an audience and access to earn income. And we need to make a break from that if we are to actually build a healthier creator economy.
Yeah, I love that. I mean, the piece, I think, does a great job of sort of outlining the challenges. Are you optimistic in that shift? I mean, I think we've seen a lot of. So I got into tech right when the social media sort of transition from Web 2 to 1 or Web 1 to Web 2 kind of happened, and I remember being so optimistic about this ability to publish to the world, and the democratization of media and distribution was a big thing. And then I think, was quickly disillusioned with the sort of like the limiting power of sort of a few major platforms gaining that space. I think we've seen that time and time again. Are you optimistic now that it's going to be different?
I'm optimistic that creators and consumers and users are going to find a way to have more autonomy and freedom to start their own businesses online and to earn income online. I am less optimistic that this is going to be supported by existing platforms, existing centralized platforms.
Yeah, I'm really fascinated with that sort of, like, what is that? Do we really ever see successful evolutions from like one epoch to another as far as business models, like maybe like AOL and eBay moving into, or I mean, I guess Google's kind of been pretty consistent in their ability, though
but they've missed social.
Exactly, right. Yeah. So I think I tend to agree with that impression.
Right. I think it's so difficult for the existing platforms to be truly creator friendly and to adhere to all of the principles that I outlined of like portability, giving creators ownership over their customers and their data and all of their relationships and content. That's just not how their business models work. They work based on network effects and lock-in and having all of the data that makes their platform useful to use. And I really struggle to see how they completely pivot that.
Yeah, for me, it always comes down to like I think a question that we should ask, especially when we're talking about social tokens and community tokens in the world of crypto, is like, why a token, and what's core to sort of this idea of ownership in the Web3 world. And I think that's it, right? It is indeed ownership, and the idea of owning a piece of the network that is core to how you access your community or deliver value or generate revenue. And to not only have, the sustainability and consistency in how you can operate within that world, but also to own a piece of those underlying rails or platforms. As much as I even see companies like Airbnb want to try to create room for, super hosts to have access to tokens at the IPO or maybe pre-IPO price, or to get stock options, that value is being delivered after 10 years of private valuations going up, and you're really only getting like the last little mile there. Whereas, participating in something like Bitcoin or Ethereum or in many of the communities that we're launching, you're getting, day one access. And so the value of that first Uber driver, or the value of that first Airbnb host, or the first Instagram influencer, I think, being able to capture an equity-like stake in the network that they're bringing to life, I think is huge. And I think is core to why these existing organizations are going to have a huge challenge in making the shift.
Yeah, I agree completely. And I think if I can add just one thing to that, I think like the existing organizations, they're also hamstrung by how they're capitalized, which is via equity and selling equity, which is heavily regulated in the US. And for a private company, you can't have more than 2,000 shareholders as a business. And obviously, looking at some of these creator platforms and any sort of like marketplace businesses, if they're successful, they have way more than 2,000 stakeholders who are helping to make the platform valuable. So by definition, they're unable to compensate and make everyone an owner. And so that's extremely limiting versus tokens.
Totally agree. So I'm curious, what are like the big fixes that you identified in the post? Like, what are the solutions to the ails of the existing creator economy?
The core of it was really a creator ownership and user ownership of everything, like of the relationships they're forming with users, of the ways to contact them, of the payment relationship, of their content, and furthermore, of the platforms themselves. So creator ownership of everything. And I think that then drives incentive alignment between the platforms that are helping them to connect with customers or to monetize their customers and the creators themselves. Without that ownership aligned, I think there's always some tension there between the interests of people who own the business and own the platform versus the people who are doing work on them.
So, I mean, you've sort of been a very supportive, loud voice, I think, in the crypto space in a way that was kind of surprising to me to start. I think you kind of came in with such force that I was like, heck yes. For those of us that have been deep down the crypto world for a long time, it felt like there was almost two economies. There's the tech world and the investor world, and there's the weird crypto things that were being built. And I think even just hearing sort of or reading a lot of the writing you've been doing recently, seeing how you've been sort of grappling with both trying to explain and articulate some of the shifts that you're seeing online and also be a bit of a steward, I think, and trying to point people in the right direction, which I think is what you did with the passion economy. And I see you sort of taking that role on in earnest again as we're sort of seeing the issues that I think are coming out of the existing creator economy and trying to champion a new way forward, and to hear ownership being the key of this makes a ton of sense. But I'm curious, what was the trigger that kind of brought you down the crypto rabbit hole in the first place?
Yeah, I think for anyone who's in crypto, I wonder if you guys will resonate with this, which is I don't think there was any one particular aha moment for me. It was 1,000 tiny cuts over years, and gradually through introspection and reflection and thinking about it a lot and reading a new piece, thinking about it, reading something else, thinking about it, observing like some of the centralized players and their actions. Like it took multiple, like thousands of different types of exposure and impressions for me to, I think, go further down the rabbit hole. There was no like single aha moment that I can identify. I would say there's a ton of values and goals that I hold very dear that have propelled me into the space. And that has always been consistent throughout my life. And those goals include helping to support individual freedom, helping to support economic opportunity. I've always been very passionate about those things. Enabling people to be free and to not have to be coerced or oppressed or exploited in any system they're in. I think like those have been the themes of my life and themes that I've lived through personally. I mean, I don't want to fully get into this, but like having been I think technically like a 1.5 generation immigrant who wasn't born in America, who came here very early on in my childhood and saw my parents struggle to make it, those themes have always been very top of mind for me. And so it's always just been very in my face that talent and merit are distributed universally, but opportunity is not. And I've always wanted to make the world more fair in that regard. And so, yeah, so all of my investing is colored with that worldview. And so the passion economy thesis was an expression of that. It was really guided by the question of how can we help people make money in a way that helps to equalize for different people's real world relationships or where they come from or who they know. Like I think marketplaces and platforms are this amazing democratizing force for income and access to customers, regardless of where you're based or who you know or like where you went to school. Like if you offer a great service or a product, you can start a store on Shopify and reach customers all over the world. And I think that's incredible. And so, yeah, that was a lot of the motivation that drove me to write that original piece about the passion economy. And then my interest in crypto comes from taking that even further. What are the sources of remaining unfairness as they currently exist on the internet? And I wrote that piece in December, The Creator Economy Needs a Middle Class. It's very stark how unfair and imbalanced like the creator economy is today, how there's widespread creator burnout, widespread insecurity. These platforms are worth billions of dollars or tens of billions of dollars, yet most creators make nothing. And I think that's hugely unfair. My interest in crypto came from how do we shift that balance of power between platforms and their participants?
Well, yeah, so much of that resonates with me. I think my initial interest in business and definitely in crypto came from experience with my father being a small business owner and just seeing both the opportunity that brought for my family and then also seeing like having a real deep fear around whether that would be available to me or further generations as sort of the internet kind of came and large platforms kind of came and like this idea of like the algorithmic overlords, I think is the exact right way to frame that. Yeah, it's interesting to see some parallels there. So core to all this is sort of this idea of ownership and this unfair distribution. And the sort of two things that come to my mind around that I'm trying to grapple with are one, in a network-based world, normal distributions don't really exist, right? In a physical world, we're sort of bound by lots of physics and distribution and the cost of moving things. And it sort of leads to more of like a potential, I think, for a middle class, or at least a normal distribution. Networks really reward the extremes, right? Like capital can flow very quickly. Attention can flow very quickly. There's part of me that really wonders, is there fairness in a network-based economy? Do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, it's a super fascinating question. And when I wrote about the idea of a creator middle class and drew a lot of parallels in that piece between the emergence of the American middle class in the real world and what's happening in the creator economy today, a lot of people wrote into me and posed the question of, is the American middle class even, does that naturally arise? Like, or was that just an aberration of history through being in the post-war period, a bunch of policies being enacted to help us throughout the war and through the Great Depression, the fact that most of the economy was manufacturing based, which is naturally local and not subject to power laws, as you mentioned. Should the middle class even exist? Was there a question? Like, is this something that we should even be striving for to create, or is it just totally artificial and it will always kind of be forced? And I think definitely I agree with you that especially in creative industries and especially online where the marginal costs are zero to distribute yourself to another customer, power laws do arise. But I think collectively we have to ask ourselves, what kind of world do we want to live in? What kind of society do we want to live in? Do we want it to be the case that there's only a handful of successful rich people in the world and everyone else has nothing? And I think hopefully, like, even the successful creators under that arrangement would say no, like that's not the kind of world that we want to live in, because that's a world in which there's a lot of unfairness and suffering and resentment probably, and like danger to themselves maybe. And so I think there will have to be a little bit of redistribution enacted in order for us to take that power law that's going to naturally arise and help the long tail. And I get that people feel kind of nervous when I talk about redistribution, but like we are redistributing things all the time. TikTok is constantly redistributing your attention to the newcomers. I've tweeted that it's universal basic distribution. TikTok gives you universal basic distribution because if you upload a video on TikTok, some people will see it and the algorithm will test it against them. There's different mechanisms existing already that are redistributing things all the time. And so, yeah, I think the only way for there to be more widespread success is some element of redistribution. And I think bundles are an example of this. Like when you are in a bundle, whether it's like the New York Times bundle of different authors, or I'm part of the Everything bundle, which is a bundle of different newsletters, or like creator DAOs are a bundle of like different creators. Like there's some redistribution in the sense that people are driving readership or audiences to each other.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. I'm Canadian, and so our approach to politics is very different than the United States in many ways. And to see, and most notably, we have socialized medicine, which to listen to some of the American politicians talk about seems like it'd be like the most evil thing in the world, and yet would probably be the one thing that you would, if you took away from Canadians, would cause like a literal revolt. And so I think there's like a lot of interesting emotion around something like that, though probably more politically driven than practically or reality driven. I think there's sort of there's actually an interesting post I think Eric Arsenault posted from the Rarible DAO a while back that I saw you jump in on. It was this idea of like, hey, Rarible is distributing all these rewards for doing things on their platform, but most people are selling, and the idea was like, can the ownership economy really exist if most people who are earning these rewards are selling, and that ownership is essentially being, centralized in a few more large capital holders. So I think that's sort of an interesting challenge, more specifically to, the work that we're doing at C Club, to think through like, okay, well, if we truly want our communities to have ownership, just giving away tokens is probably not enough. And I wonder if there's any thoughts or results of that conversation that kind of gave some insight on how we might do a better job at actually distributing ownership and ensuring that ownership stays distributed.
I have a lot of thoughts here, and I would love to hear your thoughts too. But just to start with my stream of consciousness, I think we live in a society today in which not everyone understands what ownership means or entails or the benefits of it. A lot of people are just struggling to get by, and they're in this mode of like, I need to earn income to pay my bills this week. And like, if I own this thing, what good does it do for me? In the Maslow's hierarchy of financial needs, I do think ownership is perhaps like near the top, whereas income is near the bottom, because people need to eat and feed themselves and house themselves on a daily basis. And I think without satisfying those basic needs, people aren't going to prioritize or prize ownership, which I think of as a vector to build long-term wealth. And so what we saw on that forum post on Rarible was the phenomenon Eric described of like people selling what represents ownership, this token, converting it into dollars and using that probably to like pay their bills. And I think that points to a lot of different things for me. It points to the fact that I think creators are living in this economically precarious state where they just don't have enough income. And so they're not going to hold on to this asset long term in the hope that it appreciates, because they just don't have enough cash flow to satisfy their short term needs. There's been a lot of research into how people who are living near the poverty line actually make decisions that are antithetical or counterproductive to their financial interests, but they have to do so because they are under so much anxiety and like they can't optimize in that state. I think we need to solve that underlying economic precarity. And I've written about UCI, Universal Creative Income, as a potential way to do that. I think like we need to learn from Canada and maybe have socialized medicine. Wow, this podcast is taking a political turn. I think there's like a lot of reasons why creators, especially American creators, feel really insecure and just want cash. I think we need to help them with that before we can expect them to like want to have ownership. Secondly, I think we need more education about the benefits of ownership. Like, what does it mean to own something? I think the stats are like, 50-ish% of Americans even own any public equities at all. So you have like about half of the population not really understanding what it means to have ownership in a company or a platform. And then thirdly, I would say not everything is worth owning. And so we can't expect people to just care about ownership in a vacuum. Owning a house is very different from owning an RV. One appreciates, one depreciates. And so perhaps people are not just going to value ownership for the sake of ownership. They care about what this is going to be worth in the future. And I think people are relatively rational.
Yeah, I think that's a phenomenal breakdown. I think so much of the freedom to explore that allowed me to be in the crypto space, even in the early days, and especially through the bear market, is the fact that I could work for myself and not lose healthcare. And so that may be a political thing to say, but also it's just like the most supportive thing one can do for entrepreneurship is making sure that there is a safety net for those people who take risks to make sure that they can go take those risks. And that's a hill I'll die on. It's just so obvious to me, and I think to those of us that are sort of living in those ecosystems, despite this idea that rampant, like unfettered capitalism is the best driver of innovation. I think that there's obviously huge limitations on that. I really like this idea of not everything is worth owning, because I think it ties into the education piece quite a bit. And so the way that I would have answered the question is like, one, yes, many people are just not in a position to make that decision. And so we need to think through how we can increase earning opportunities and value creation opportunities that go alongside earning tokens, right? So working for a DAO where you're actually getting paid a salary and also earning tokens is a great version of how you can pay your bills and still have an opportunity to hold on to the ownership stake or the voice stake in some of these communities. But also like the broader education component of, I think we do a poor job of that really in crypto, because it's not just about why ownership is important, which I think there's a bunch of work to be done there, but also like what type of ownership is important. And even us using the word ownership to refer to tokens is kind of like a bit of a twist, right? Because it's not like it's ownership. Like some projects where it's, that ownership is represented on chain, and like I hold an Ethereum token and that Ethereum token is mine, or maybe Bitcoin's a better example, right? That Bitcoin will only ever be one of 21 million Bitcoin. And so I own that percentage of the network and nobody else can change it. That's not the case for the vast majority of projects that are out there. And so ownership, even across different projects within this asset class, is very different. And so it makes a ton of sense as to why it would take, why folks would have a more short-term mindset for assets where they don't really understand what the bigger vision is, don't understand what the value of holding it is. And, you're going to see these massive switches in volatility and like holding through all of that. I mean, it is a great privilege. It has taken me many years to be able to be in a position where I can hold some of these early assets that I've earned through all of that volatility without a worry. So I can act more like a venture capitalist in the space, even though, I don't invest as a venture capitalist, but I can buy and earn tokens that I can hold on to despite any short-term fluctuations, because I believe some of them will be worth a lot in the future. Some of them will probably be worth none, but I can afford to take that risk. And so to me, that's like the most exciting part of what we saw in the NFT boom that happened earlier this year. And I think the growth in NFTs was this ability for people to actually start to go from 0 to 1 ETH, maybe is a 0 to 1 moment, where you can actually, create something and turn that into something of more value. And so much of the flywheel I think we've seen sort of power this most recent excitement in the space has come from that. A whole new world of people coming in going, I can make something and earn on-chain revenue or assets that part can be converted into me paying my bills, and many have done really well with that, but then also part can be sort of more of an investment in or at least an ownership stake in some of the platforms. Or, I think there's a lot of great examples of like specifically in NFTs, creating something on the platform equaling, a say in the governance of something like Super Rare, which is a token that just came out pretty recently. So I think there's like just a lot of work to be done here. And I think it's a conversation we need to have more publicly, more often, because I think we do a lot of, and I'm guilty of it too, a lot of hand waviness where like you can talk about the high level excitement and interest and saying, hey, core value of ours at C Club is that projects that launch with us through C Club become owners in C Club, and we want our community to increase their ownership in C Club. But the practicalities of doing that are still challenging and require a lot of sort of creativity and innovation on our part, but also communication and evolution, I guess, in how we're thinking about it, because my guess is we don't get it right from day one. And so how do we continue to live those values and navigate that moving forward? It's something I spent a lot of time thinking about.
Yeah. And just to give it another data point around, I think, how much education is needed and how much we need to continue talking about and having conversations is earlier this year, I went in to teach an angel investing class to a group of social media content creators. I actually did this twice. One was like with this house of YouTubers who are all living together in LA, and another one was entirely virtual. But I would say like a commonality of both of them was that they came in with actually just such a basic level of like, why should they even care about angel investing, and why should they care about ownership of the platforms that they're using versus just optimizing for revenue? That had to be basically a discussion in and of itself, when I think in our world, people tend to take it for granted that, yeah, like obviously we want to be owners, because all around us, we see people talking about investing and people making it their career to be a professional investor, i.e. a professional owner of different projects. And we see like early employees see friends of ours becoming fabulously wealthy because they joined the right company and owned the right stock at the right time. Most people don't have that exposure. And so they're wondering, like, if I have a brand deal where I'm earning money, or I have this angel investing opportunity where I have to spend money, like, why would I choose the latter? I think this is just something that's much more needed worldwide, which is like financial education. Like, just we need to educate people about personal finance and all of these different concepts.
Yeah, so interesting. So I have so many different threads I want to pull on with you here. Just to continue this thought a little bit more, like, you sort of, where you sit in the ecosystem, as an investor, and as, I don't know if you'll get mad at me for calling you a thought leader, if that's a dirty word in your world, but, somebody who has ideas and people and innovations sort of in and around you, and also somebody who's taken such a bold step into this ownership economy Web3 world. I'm curious, when you look at like this social crypto space, this new trend that's sort of emerging, like, what are we doing right, and what could we be doing better to bring more new waves of people into the space?
By social crypto, do you mean consumer crypto?
Yeah, I think I would say consumer crypto. I don't know if I like that term. Ultimately, I think it's like let's say NFTs, DAOs, communities, social tokens, consumer experiences for sure would fall into that as well. Like there's still a big barrier to people coming into crypto. My bet is that most of them aren't going to want to jump right into DeFi. They're probably going to jump into something that's much more fun and interesting and dynamic than that for consumers. So, what are we doing right, and what could we be doing better?
Yeah, I ask myself this question a lot because I still see a ton of startups, not to single anyone out, who are still trying to build around the edges of Facebook and TikTok and YouTube and all of those like social media giants. And I've come to be a little bit pessimistic about those approaches for all of the reasons that we've outlined before. I just think it's really, really difficult to win in that ecosystem. And ultimately, by perpetuating those centralized social platforms, I think people are kind of perpetuating the oppression and the exploitation of creators and users. And I think we need to make a clean break away from that. And so I've been trying to figure out what can I do to get more people building in Web3 and building for the ownership economy. And yeah, I think the blog post that I published last week about the creator economy being in peril and different proposed solutions to help, that was an attempt on my part to inspire more people to build in the space. But I think we can always do more. I think we can write more. I think we can talk more. We can have conversations. We can help people understand why building a CRM system to help people export their TikTok followers is just not going to be a very promising project, probably. Yeah, I think there's both a push and a pull thing that needs to happen, where I think we need to point to success cases of where crypto consumer projects are solving real needs and enabling superpowers for creators and for their users, and how cool that is. And that's kind of the pull that draws people into the space. And I think we need to simultaneously push people in by highlighting what's wrong with the current system, how creators are being commoditized, how they're building their businesses on rented land, not owned land, and how ultimately that's going to be perpetuating the cycle of precarity for them. So I think both need to work in tandem. Yeah, I think there's just so much to do. I would love to do 10,000 of these podcasts and talk about this all day to encourage people. I put out a Google spreadsheet form last week where I'm trying to match Web2 software engineers who are interested in learning about Web3 with some of my portfolio companies, because a lot of them are actually really desperate for talent and they don't care if you know Solidity. Yeah, I would love to brainstorm with people on what more can we do? How do we get more people building in this space? Because I think we need to have a wave, and today there's a ripple.
I think I see the wave building, and I was specifically going to drive at your experience in with that tweet where you asked if are you a Web2 engineer looking to transition to Web3, and I think the next tweet was, okay, here, fill out this form because my DMs are just blowing up, right? And obviously that's all relative, and I think a wave is many thousands of engineers making that transition rather than probably the hundreds that were in your DMs. But I'm seeing two trends that are really interesting. One, I'm seeing a lot of what's called Web2 startups, looking at Web3 and being like, I need to be building over there. And I would say that's a trend that I've seen pick up in the last month in real earnest, which is interesting. Most of the advice that I give those folks is that it's kind of hard to do a transition from Web 2 to Web 3 if you've already set yourself up as a Web 2 organization. And so it's going to be kind of interesting to see what the result and actions are that come through that. But the fact that that's even within the realm of conversation, I think is big. And then two, this wave of DAOs is capturing people who were not paying attention before, weren't interested before. And, one of the big challenges I deal with is, and this really frustrates me, where I have talented people reaching out and saying, hey, I want to be of help, put me to work, and me not knowing exactly how to put them to work, just given where we're at in our project, or, just like maybe the effort or friction that's involved in trying to make those matches. And so the thing that we're focused on quite a bit in Seed Club, and then I know dozens of other projects that are also focused on this, whether as core products or it's just part of their operations, or trying to reduce the friction in onboarding new people into DAOs, because that is sort of another place where, one, people can earn crypto, which I think is a huge inflection point. People are earning crypto versus needing to buy it now, and that's meaningful. And then two, they're now going to be part of communities. And those communities are supportive and educational and self-referencing. And, when you're trying to do something new and, maybe not so true for you, but most of my IRL friends are still like, what the hell do you even, like, watching my mom try to explain what I do is just really quite entertaining. And maybe I should try to get her on the podcast because that'd be kind of fun. But, so I see this trend happening. And I think doing it in community is, I have an amazing sense making network. I have an amazing community that allows me to keep up to date with what's happening in the space. If you do not have that, it's just going to be impossible to keep up versus, or even just get in the first place. So to me, those are the two most optimistic pieces. And then, later on top, this consumer crypto where people are playing games and earning to play games, and there's support networks around those. Or, I think there's probably a half dozen new projects that are launching where the initial sort of interaction is going to look much more like playing a game, but in the back end, you're earning and learning some of these fundamental, where did I learn financial management? Playing Civilization. How do I manage this video game that I was playing in my early teen years? I truly can trace back my interest in so many of these things to video games. And now people are playing those games with, I saw you liked a tweet from, it was about a 12-year-old YGG player, I think, or Axie player earning, making these big moves that I would be like, oh man, I wish my trading strategies were even remotely that effective. So I'm pretty optimistic.
The next generation gives me hope, for sure. I think we're over the hill now. We should just cede our jobs over to Gen Alpha. But yeah, I agree with you. I think what is really needed is better discovery of all of these opportunities and better on-ramps for people to get into them. There's so much interesting activity happening in DAOs. A ton of DAOs need help in all sorts of different ways. And there's no place to expose that to the world and matchmake that. Yeah, I think startup idea for someone, basically a jobs board for DAOs. I think there's questions about whether DAOs want to have people do work who are not part of the community first and foremost. But I think if the space is to grow and scale, that kind of approach is needed. Part of the issue is that all of these information and resources and social groups they're kind of more fragmented now. There is no one go-to place that you go to see what's going on in the space. Instead, it's hundreds of different Discord servers, Telegram group chats, people that you follow on Twitter, different discourse forums online. And if you're not in the space already and deeply embedded, I think it's quite intimidating to know where to begin. So yeah, I think helping newcomers ramp up is definitely a worthwhile thing to do.
Yeah, I think, the two easiest communities or projects for us to back today were, one, anybody doing anything education focused, specifically around the ramping up. I think that makes a ton of sense. That's a function within these organizations, but also can be a product in and of itself. I know a half dozen friends that would probably want to be a part of that tomorrow. And I think that's happening, but still pretty fragmented. And then two, the idea of being able to surface that talent and matchmake that talent, while yes, not the most straightforward, I think straightforward on the surface, but actually quite complicated further down, but also a huge benefit to the ecosystem generally. We're going to wrap up here pretty quickly, but I have sort of one question in all of this because, so much of what I've loved about this conversation is I get this sort of activist vibe from you. There's like a values-based way that you want to see the world exist. It doesn't exist like that right now, and you're being a very forceful advocate or articulate advocate for that new world. And much of that involves sort of community ownership and sort of like a decentralization or I mean, I guess maybe like an abolition of the ways that wealth was created in the world that you sort of come from, which is this like consumer tech investing world, which traditionally, in the last 10, 20 years has made the money off of funding these marketplaces and platforms, et cetera. And so knowing that you have great visibility into the Web3 world as it is today and kind of where ideally it goes, what role do folks like yourself who are fund managers walking around with their investment hat on, what role do investors play in this emerging world?
Yeah, it's such a good question. And I feel this sort of underlying tension all the time that I try to reconcile between a lot of my values and goals versus like this job that I have as a venture capitalist to fund things and to make sure that my investments do well. And recently someone on Twitter posed that question to me as well in like a very skeptical, challenging kind of way. Like, what are you doing? Like, you're so conflicted. And my answer is, I think change takes a lot of different forms and there's lots of different paths to change. I think there's the radical revolution, bloodshed path to change, which I'm not an advocate for. And then I think there's more gradual change. And I think gradual change both takes the effort of folks who are trying to build new systems, as well as people who are trying to evolve the system from within. And so what is my role as a VC/activist? I think a lot of different things. And I think VCs can take an active role in pushing the world towards the direction of better platforms that are more creator and worker friendly. And how we do that is, well, I don't want to tell other people what to do, but I'll just describe what I do. Like, what I do is I try to challenge my founders to build products and enact policies that are more creator friendly. I always try to push them towards doing things that are a little bit more radical than perhaps anyone could have envisioned. For instance, like encouraging them to give a stipend to their creators to pay for mental health treatment, because a lot of creators on the platform are suffering from burnout or anxiety or depression or whatever. So, for instance, one of my companies, Streamloots, introduced this mental health program last year where they're actually helping their creators to pay for mental health treatment. I think another thing that we can do is to push for the capitalization of these businesses to look different from how they historically have been. So historically, even when I first started in venture 5 years ago, the way that you would raise a round for a company was to just like get a lead investor who would probably take up nearly 100% of the round, get a few angels in there, and then you would be done. I don't think that's the approach that founders should take if they're building a creator-led or like any sort of platform business that has stakeholders. Like, I think you should make as many of those stakeholders investors and equity holders as possible. And maybe that means like even giving them grants as advisors too. Like, I think that's a way to make sure that your interests are aligned with those of the people who are actually adding value to the platform. And then thirdly, I do believe that if the ownership economy thesis plays out as I wish it to, and these companies end up being more community driven in how they raise funding and how they distribute ownership, then I think VCs actually do play a much more diminished role in the future. And I would be happy to see that. I would be happy to put myself out of a job in a few years and just be a creator on some of these platforms. And that's how I earn ownership in them. I think that's a fairer world for all, because VC as it exists today is in large part because this class of individuals, VCs, have special access to investing opportunities that retail investors don't, or that even people who are using the platforms don't. And to me, that's messed up and broken. And I would like to see that end.
Lee, I couldn't think of a better place for us to end our conversation today than on that note. I've really enjoyed getting to know you over the last few months and consider our conversations to be some of the highlights of my days and weeks when we do get to have them, and have been a very appreciative of your support of our work here at C Club since the earliest of days. So thank you. And if there's one place you'd like us to send people to, where should people, like, what is the best place to either follow you or to be a part of the world that you're building right now?
Probably my Twitter, which is the feed of everything that I have going on. So I'm LJin18 on Twitter. And thank you for the kind words. I feel the same towards you, and I always enjoy our conversations very much. So thank you for having me.
Well, my pleasure, Lee. Very much so. All right. Well, let's leave it there. Thanks so much, Lee. And we'll see you on the internet.
Wonderful.